Everyone, we're back. I'm sorry I'm late. So, we're gonna do some reading tonight. Fourth story of the upcoming short stories for... No. The Voices Within is a book of 8 short stories. This is the 4th. Let me know if the music's too loud or anything. I just want that as background music so it's not so dead out here. So this one dropped last week. Ready to go. Got a new follower message, but damn, I can't find them. Hang on. Maybe you can flip through everything right here. There we go. Got a new follow, Weed and Son. Thank you for the follow. Sure, I gotcha. So, yep, we're gonna go and read now The Lilac and the Stone. This is a new author. I've never seen their name before for anything. Oh god, creative consultation still lists an user. Probably to write in all the stuff he worked up. I don't know. Alright. Among all the great craggy, unfeeling boulders of our people, Dagran was always my flower. For all the good it ever did him. Or me. You can imagine what it costs a gentle soul to grow up a dwarf. It may even be worse than to come into this world saddled with the soul of a daughter instead of a son. That one singular roll of the bones determined much of my life before my fist first found my mother's braid. My body robbed me blind with its first breath. It was a girl's, therefore not what my father wanted. I am Moira Thorasan, daughter of Magni Bronbeard, and his bride, Emir, Princess of Ironforge, widow to the Dark Iron Emperor, mother to his heir Dagran II, and I have been angry since I was old enough to walk the path set before me. Sometimes I think my anger will outlive me, that they will close up the earth over my body, and long after I am forgotten, some brutal, black-hardened jewel left from my rot will work its way up out of the moss, hissing and spitting and still scalding hot. Maybe they will use it to warm a village somewhere, an eternity of cozy hearths and ready stews fueled by this bitter fury I carry, but I could never fully satisfy. I like the idea of that. For a long time, I wore my anger on my chest, glinting like one of the gems on that shield they can't stop squabbling over, as if it could as if it could shield me, as if it could shield anyone. But in time, I learned that anger showed as anger wasted. It only puts others on guard, makes them fearful or defiant, pushes them to dig into defensive positions, fuels rumors of madness and whispers of revolt, and blunts its own edge as even fear fades with overuse. So I learned to make that shield gem inside myself, pushing the rage deep down into the caverns of my heart, compressing it into a crusted geode of pain, Also that my husband's people might like me a bit better. All my mistakes have come from that horrid boiling, crushed, placed inside me. Sometimes I'm sorry, I'm a little tired. Let me try that sentence again. All my mistakes have come from that horrid boiling, crushed, placed inside me. Sometimes I wonder who I might have been without it. I do not worry that my son will make the most mistakes. I worry that he will never get the chance to make them. Because for all that, there is power in righteous fury, and poor Dagrin does not have even that to protect him. In this great vast universe, that boy has never looked on anything with hate or disgust or fear or rage, only curiosity and longing to understand. He has no fury to keep him safe. He has only me. But all these great officials who gathered here to bicker over old jewelry will not suffer me to stand between him and their punishing world forever. And we welcomed them, despite the ugly expectations they wish to shackle to my son. We welcomed them to Quench Vessel Hall, my late husband's favorite retreat, a vast house built into the great caverns that make a whistling war flute of the subterranean plains that stretch out from Shadowforge City. We welcomed them, and they looked at my child like he was a particularly unimpressive carpet. Quench Vessel Hall is a pretty place, though too enormous to ever be called a home. Dagrin and I both have paced out the rough rock clerestories and walkways, the polished black marble arcades over molten underground rivers connecting one vast wing to another, the silver silted lancet windows and balconies woolly with fire bloom. One could walk for hours, staring out into acre after acre of luminous stalactites and glittering stone, hours upon hours, and never leave the house. I have always walked to clear my head, to have a moment of quiet without these stomping bellowers demanding to be satisfied every second. And there is never a second in my life of a queen regent without stomping, unsatisfied bellowers. Sometimes I think I see my son running ahead of me as he usually do, small and sweet and careless, laughing as I have not heard in many years. Then it is gone, vanished around a blue agate column into the shadows of my mind, and all that remains is regret and the problem. I have gone to several meetings now concerning the great shield discovered by explorers in the Badlands. I have examined the bloody thing closely, and it was bloody, splattered with the stuff, blackened and cracked and centuries dry. The battle side was quartered by a cross of 3 delicately braided metals, iron, bronze, and gold, dividing the massive surface into 4 images, faded by time and bludgeoned by experience. An ornate and delicate silver crown barnacled in black pearls and jewels of purple and green against a black field, with a great war hammer thrust through its circlet whose pommel was a simple knuckle of plain, rough-hewn granite. An eagle and lion rampant adorced on a field of white, and below them a branch bearing both orange blossoms and orange in the mouth of a helpless lamb. A great iron goblet studded with chunks of onyx and amber and filled with blood pricked out in ruby dust. And last, a tower of black rock, its masonry cracked through the middle, engulfed in flames of topaz and garnet that spilled up and out into other quarters, threatening them all. And all around these designs, a border of that same braided metal, but with a 4th ribbon of silver on which it is graved runes so ancient that not even the most learned scholars dare claim the capacity to read them, or even swear to it that they represent words at all. I have listened to the evidence and the arguments, both practical and born of passion. I have closely examined the artifact, and I have come to the definitive conclusion that I do not care about that slab of metal and time-chewed leather. It is nothing and means nothing. Artisans with too much time on their hands trying to impress some long-dead king who wouldn't know rampant from passant, but I'm certain truly excelled at separating brains from skulls. It is very finely made and rather expensive reason to fight. Nothing more. Oh, it is for the Bronzebeards because the method of braiding such metals so finely together is a secret of their smiths alone? Is it for the dark irons because the rubies and opals and onyxes were cut and finished in their style? Or is it for the wild hammers? Because the eagle and the lion together make the griffin? Do let us consult the heads of all the great families. Perhaps we should have a war about it. And so on and so forth for the long history of dwarven kind struggle to stop being piles of rock and start being people. We certainly will get around to finishing the process any day now, but not today. Today they argued, they quarreled, then thundered about, puffing up their deltoids like birds in mating season. Then various mothers were insulted, and the standard past crimes dredged up. Then lunch. But lunch is never just lunch, oh no. Statecraft is tablecraft on both sides of the board. I suspected this lot starved themselves for a month before they arrived so that their vigor and appetite would cost the Shadowforge vaults as dearly as possible. It's all a dance, a pretty pantomime, each step careful, graceful, precise. Even as we all pretend to be big, brawling brutes with sword pommels for brains. Even as we all know it's going to end up in a museum or a monastery where everyone can look at it, but few will ever take the time. It is absolutely exhausting. And I am so much better at it than they are. How could I not be? Not one of these walking belches ever learned to bake their own bread or bother to scrub their own tables after they slopped ale all over it. And mind you, don't spoil the grain with your fat fingers, Grunthin Windwhip. Your griffin's arse flea. Oh, has Thurn Barrelbane, the great bat fart of Ironforge, let the oven get too hot and spoiled the morning loaves? How many times shall the cook beat him? No times whatsoever. They were born for better things, weren't they? They are so terribly good at pounding on tables with their fists and bellowing demands, while I do the quieter work. It's beneath them to know a favorite meal can make a man more agreeable to a cause, or a luxurious bedroom set with same flowers his mother once loved can soften his resolve, or sour ale that does not agree with his stomach can turn his temper against everyone equally, or how a silly little sticky latch on a stable might release his ram to mate with one of our ewes and remind him quite vividly of the value of alliances, or how guest gifts given them give oh boy, that's a weird sentence. Or how guest gifts given with enough care can put him in debt without his ever even knowing he has agreed upon terms. These proud strutters think the dance state begins at their arrival. They cannot imagine the music began weeks before, nor fathom the advantage of owning the dance floor. Did I try to teach my son these things? Of course I did. It took so long to understand them myself. I resisted all that for years upon years. I didn't want to know it. My mother's world, my mother's ideas, my mother's skills and subtleties when I wanted only to become my father, body, soul, mind, and throne. Not only to become as he was, but for him to see it in me, see it for himself, and not because my dying mother told him to look. If I learned to bake the braided bread and spin the thinnest metal into linen thread to make it shine and memorize the leverageable childhood pains of every politically significant man in Casmodan, I would still be nothing to him. Magni Bronzebeard would never turn his face to his daughter and see a son. So many mistakes because I wanted only to be like him. To solve every problem by making it bleed. So much pain because other solutions didn't make me feel like my father's heir. So much ale spilled on so many tables, and for what? It would take years for me to mold myself into the leader my people needed, to bury my anger, to learn the ways of the dark irons, to stop letting my father's disappointment steal me from myself. I had made mistakes in the doing of it, but it was I who saw my husband's vision realized, who helped free the dark irons from the thumb of Ragnaros, and it was I who allied them to the other clans, who led them into the broader alliance. And it was only then that my father saw me for what I was and not whom he thought I should be. And I would never let this be the model for rearing my own son. Unlike the nobles braying about our table, my boy had baked his own meat pies of boar and bear, spun his own wool, stitched his own tunics, washed the stones of Quench Vessel Hall till they shone and he bled. The trouble has never been that he does not know how to play the game. It's that he refused to play it at all. He will hole up with his books, pretend not to know these things. He will not behave like a dwarf, only like Dagrin, and a flower amongst slab of rocks must appear to be stone or be crushed. The High Steward, Angrid Coldfeast, prepared and set out the meal alone. The clan representatives ignored her as she entered. Who is she to them? Just an old woman. Might as well be a piece of broken furniture fit only to rest a mug of beer on, stooping and scuffling on the flagstones, her back camelled with age, eyes distant and glazed, arthritic hands quivering on the lip of a great golden platter stabbed with the griffin sigils of Wildhammer, piled high with sugared morsels and spiced haggis, blood sausages smothered in boiling bramble-bear butter sauce imported from Coltiris. Grunthin was such a greedy, plump little cake snatch when he was a boy. I never once wanted to hear his mother complain about how he stained his leathers with drips and globs of bramble-bear butter sauce, but I'm glad of her whining now. After settling Grunthin and Falstad Wildhammer, poor old doddering Angrid steadied herself as she slid a bronze platter stamped with the seals of Ironforge. The huge plate was crammed to the edge with ice-fin fillets, honey-spiced lichen, tender boar stuffed with winter figs. Thurn Barrowbane licked his chops. Whenever he was ill, his old nursemaid made him honey-spiced lichen to suck on, made him feel drowsy and agreeable, cared for and unthreatened. But Thurn had not come alone. None of the clans sent only one mouth to argue with. The Bronzebeard representative, my uncle Muradin, reached eagerly for a fistful of the Arctic char from Dunmoreau, his favorite, preserved out of season. And then there's my plate. Blackened iron, bearing bitter greens, crayfish hearts still in their shells, and a round of red-spiced braided bread seeded through with dried fruit, onions, a bit of hard cheese, and morsels of bacon. As big as my head, and twice as pretty. I know all this because I planned it. I learned long ago that I detest surprises, though there was one I welcomed gladly, Angrid. Angrid is older than Magma. When the Emperor and I first came here, young and in love and determined to fill every one of these rooms with a child or at least exhaust ourselves trying, Angrid was already stark white of braid. As far as I know, she sprang whole from the foundation stones of this place when the first hammer struck the first slab. When we met, she was mistress of the kitchens, a bare spinster branch of a minor family's scrub brush. Now she is the singular gem set in Quench Vessel Hall's stark prongs. Nothing passes here that she does not know. But few who pass here know her, and that is how we two have devised it, since I became a widow and she became my spy-master. Ingrid's hand was perfectly steady. She poured hot vinegar into a hot bowl to dredge my crayfish through, because her hand is always perfectly steady, unless I tell her it ought not to be. I make apologies for her infirmary and her hearing trouble when she possesses neither. The great clan leaders do not care. They do not even see her. She is nothing to them. We devised our finger language when I was a young bride expected to visit here often. Of course, I never got the chance to be an old bride. We became so quick and subtle at it that we would finish our conversation before anyone else thought to ask why I so insistently played with my signet rings, or touched the prongs of my forks, or soundlessly tapped my knuckles with my thumb. "Where's my boy?" my fingers asked. "Where else? In the library," hers answered. "Still? What is he doing?" asked the raise of one eyebrow and a sharp dig of my chin towards the north wing of the house. "Nothing useful. No one ever sired an heir on a book, that's all I know," said the subtle movements of her fingernails on the edge of a plate, and then tugging her wispy, snowy, mole-spattered mutton chops I have come to love so dearly. "Summon him. He ought to be here." "He will not come, my queen, you know that." "Stubborn like his father, and mine." "And you?" I tossed the heart shell onto the floor and sighed. "Brothers, I'm nearly ready to call for my mace to break this bauble into 4 pieces. We can each take one home, pitch the last one into the sea, and go back our usual business, while it's still warm and waiting for us." "No one who thinks that would satisfy Ironforge ought to call me brother," Thurn Bellbane snarled. "That shield belongs to us. How can you deny it? A child of the Bronzebeards yourself. Are your loyalties truly so bent to the dark iron when your son reflects the lineage of both houses?" "Subtle as a cudgel, this one. My first loyalty is, as ever, to our people." Grunthin snorted around a butter-greased mouthful. "Oh, just let us fight it out, Moira. It's what we're going to do anyway in the end. I don't know why you're putting it off. This will all be over soon as I am allowed to make my points clearly and efficiently." Windwhip held up one massive hand and then the other by way of illustration. "Arguments without fists are like sentences without punctuation. You might manage it, but why make it so much more work for yourself and everyone else? Easier to just do it right the first time." Falstead looked around to interject, but was cut off by Thurn. "Oh, I heartily agree," the Bronzebeard's seconds slurred over gulps of ale. "Since the start of this council, it's been too long since we've all had it out, either amongst ourselves or with some third party. Give us a fight and more bottles of whatever this stuff is. More of this. Is there more of this?" My own uncle looked me in the eye, his beard wet with food I paid for. He cleared his throat as he meant to say something truly meaningful. "She won't let it come down to blows. She knows she'll lose," Grunthin cut in, letting it lie there on the table like a new reeking course no one would be so uncouth as to refuse. He was waiting for a laugh, a grin, but I indulged him only with a sigh. I know what I am. I know my way in this world. All the careful foods and flowers and codes and whispers will work, but with a dwarf, you always have to use punctuation too. As fast as my father ever taught me, I snatched the iron crab prong from its bowl, flipped my grip on the handle, and shoved it hard into the Wildhammer's idiot knee below the table. He screamed in pain. "Come on, Grunthin," my uncle said. "You set yourself up for that one. I think we all know better by now, I twisted the prong into Grunthin's joint. His eyes bulged. I leaned in closer, with the eyes of all those men and their seconds, and even the creatures on the shield boring into me, waiting to see which way it would go before I choose a side. The cowards. "Wind-whipped whelp," I hissed. "Did I lose against the Frostmane while you huddled in your keep, fearing me more than the trolls who threatened our lands?" Grunthin would not beg with his mouth. His eyes said it, clearly and efficiently enough for all to see. "Go clean yourself up, boy," Murden said. And you never saw a room empty itself faster, except for my uncle grinning fatly and smugly across the table. Thanks for your assistance, Uncle, I said, not without amusement. Always happy to clear a room for my niece to maneuver, Muradin acknowledged, inclining his woolly head. I do hope you're right and these lumps can be soothed by Mummy's soup and Daddy's favorite tune on the lute. But I fear you may not be able to leverage this weight so deftly. They're egging you on, looking to test Dagrin with all this. They want to see what he'll do, the kind of heir he'll be. They won't go or settle this until he gives them that show. He speared a crab with his own dagger, one with no fancy sigils or jewels, just a hard, sharp, cruel triangle of metal accustomed to use. I did all this for my son. I felt my face burn red. As heir to both thrones, he has the power to steer this council. But Uncle, if proving himself to the council to the powerful families is only a matter of brute force, you know he'll never be able to pull it off. I am trying to make another way, a way for him. Titans know he's not even here to pretend he's ready for their sake. Muradin nodded sadly. And they know it. They look for him around door frames, and every time he's not there, they question more and more whether he ever will be. The old dwarf put his hand on my arm. I know your father did not do right by you. He broke his promise to Emir, looking out for you. Keeping someone safe does not mean you deny them the tools they need to make their way after you're gone. But it is not much wiser to protect Dagrin so fiercely that he doesn't believe he needs armor at all, or that he will ever walk in that armor alone. Muradin slapped his knees with broad hands and stood, adjusting his belt around his belly. The old bronzebeard warrior glanced at the bloody fork on the floor. They'll want to reconvene in the morning. Bring him. He's of age. It's beyond time. He's a sweet enough boy, Moira, but he can't rule over dwarfs if you won't let him try to be one. There is no natural light in Quenchvessel Hall except in one place. The manor, the grounds, the stables, the armory, even the walls and rivers all sprawl, clatter, rise, and tumble deep underground. The stoves and corridors and buttressed colonnades glow a faint red from the hot magma far below, illuminating somewhat every wall and arch, broken by occasional orange flames and faceted lanterns where the shadow grows too deep. Outsiders always found it dreary and oppressive. My people find it safe, reassuring, correct. But there is one place where a new husband, young enough to rip out a strip of the night sky for his wife's shawl if only she wanted it, ordered the craggy stone ceiling breached all the way to the surface, that had thatched and engineered with clear, thick crystal to let in the sun and nothing else. And that single shivering shaft of daylight falls into the portrait hall, on a painting that should not be there, for it shows no dark iron ancestor or hero who earned their honor there. It is only a painting of my father, holding my mother's hand gently and looking at her with a private, naked fondness that no paint should ever be able to capture. There is no path to the great library from the meeting vaults without passing through the portrait hall. It pained me to look on it now, after all that has come to pass. My parents, illuminated by my husband's love because I missed my home, never guessed how short a time I would be wed, and why. Magni Bronzebeard, my father, who could not let me be or use me well. He held my mother as she died, ripped apart by ice trolls. She stared into the ruin of her guts and swore to be my true father, to be there for me always. And beside those nice words, his only action was to teach me to hit everything in my way as hard as I could. That is not how my father was taught. I suppose he thought it was because he enjoyed the hitting parts most, so he remembered them best. But from the moment he drew breath, Everyone from the nurses to the Vales to the soldiers below in the courtyard believed him to be competently violent and strong. His education was to temper that natural steel with judiciousness, magnanimity, fairness, and the occasional necessary mercy. With my first breath, sorry. With my first breath, my father knew me to be inferior, weaker, softer, sweeter scented, unserious, ignorable, small. Given a girl to raise to a throne, he deemed her education must be to cut that natural linen into the harshest battle tunic imaginable, because only at her strongest did she stand the slightest chance. I was given no philosophy of rule, no lessons from a foreign mage on the niceties of justice, never taught to hold back if ever I struck a blow to spare the weak or innocent. A prince who does not use all his strength is still fearsome, even wise and merciful. A princess is merely that, a princess. If she does not swing with every crumb of might, she may never get to swing a second time. But perhaps that is not fair. Magni thought those things. Magni arranged my world so. But there are daughters, though not so, and sons as well. Perhaps because my father loomed so colossally in my view, I could not see that my pain was only his made flesh, and not every eye in the world was cast against me because I could not be a son. I tried to do better with Dagrin. I did try, but I became lost somewhere in it, in the reflections of pain, and in trying to protect him as I was not. I protected myself and left him bare. Perhaps when I finally saved myself from this frozen prison of a promise half kept, when I showed so bright and swung so hard in the depths of a dungeon that the Emperor himself raised me up and treated me as his future, loved me enough to let the sun into his stronghold only for me, when I became a queen in my own right, won in the battle of love, which is no less a war than any open plain churned with bodies, that man in the painting took it from me. My own father. He could not bear to let me own my birthright, but neither would he allow me another. And then my nurse in her veil put this tiny, wrinkled boy into my arms and said, "Make him a king. Make him a man. Make him a warrior before whom everyone who could not see you for your father's shadow will tremble." And what was I to do with him? What good could I be to the strange mirror of my Dagrin? Another Dagrin, but not another. Nothing like his father or his mother. Born quiet, gentle, and loving as I was not, as no man I ever knew even wanted to be. Born so happy and kind that Tooth Gnasher himself would let him kiss his nose, to whom violence would have to be taught, because he drew only wisdom from my breast. Ah, my son, what will you be with a mother like me? The cold sun filtered down through the crystal and laid like a hand against my mother's painted cheek. I watched the light move for a long time. Too long. So many years since I could bear to look up as I passed through the door to the library that inevitably held my son, no matter the hour. So many years since I could stand to look at the family that never was. On the stone wall behind the painting, a tangled knot of roots, branches, and flowers had broken through the rock. A spring lilac, determined to live, slowly shattering its own foundation as it grew. But what could it do? Stop growing? None of us can. And there beyond the grand door and the paintings and the lanterns was Dagrin like a seed in its husk, where Angrid said he would be, where no one ever needed anyone to say he'd always be. In the great library, a quench vessel hall, surrounded by books open to chapters and verses and illuminations on 1,000 different subjects, reading as was his preference, 9 or so all at once, jumping each to each like a butterfly sampling flowers. Dagrin Tharasan II, beautiful and gentle and quick, hair of fright, fingers covered in ink stains, several seasons from being a man grown, eyes alight with interest and whatever peculiar excitement he took from those pages as from no other source. On the southern wall, Dagrin had hung a length of parchment bearing a detailed, carefully shaded drawing of that damned shield and all its confounding mystery. Half of it was painted in brilliant colors, the precise colors of the real thing. Half was still dark charcoal lines. It really was quite an extraordinary likeness. Even the dried blood and dents were perfectly duplicated. "Did you draw that?" I asked my child. "What?" Dagrin asked, startled as if out of a dream. He groped for a pair of spectacles, a thing I had hardly seen a handful of dwarves come near in all my days. Only the gods know how many of them are half-blind and full proud enough to need them badly but never admit it. The boy shoved them onto the bridge of his nose under his wild explosion of white hair, long ago fallen loose from its braid. "Oh, that, of course. Who else?" "It's very good." "If you say so. It's not really important." "How not? All these men have swaggered here, strapped with enough weapons to pass for porcupines over the thing. It's what I've come to talk to you about." "Well, of course it's important, but it isn't at all. The shield is just leather and metal. It's nothing dreaming of being something. The drawing of the shield has as much meaning as the shield itself. Both can be true. Do you see?" When it came to Dagrin, I rarely saw. "How long has it been since you've eaten?" The heir to 2 clans hitched up his trousers like a babe not yet grown into them. So thin, so frantic with energy, he waved me off. "I can eat any time, but I'm so close to figuring it out. It's the words. It's the words I can't get a hold of." Dagrin flinted from book to book to book, some as wide as my own arms outstretched. There really isn't a language in Azeroth that I don't have a toehold on. Some of the very dead ones I might only grasp the basics, but once you know one, the others sort of open up, like a puzzle box. There are only so many ways to put words and symbols together, but I can't nail down a thing about the inscription. The runes don't play well in any tongue I've ever heard whispers of. So I thought I might be able to track down that tower. Maybe it's not just the pretty design, but a real fortress that existed somewhere in some era. Then I thought I might be able to find the artisan who made it. Match the style to those huge heraldic books I used to love. Do you remember? Of course I remember. Children always think they are the only ones who remember their childhoods. But to do that, I have to understand the style well enough to recognize it elsewhere, and I never cared much for art. So I taught myself to sketch and paint. You taught yourself to do that? The boy shrugged. It wasn't that hard. And anyway, it didn't help, so I moved on to something else. There's something about the goblet that bothers me. I scrambled over to yet another huge tome, half forgetting I was there. Dagrin, I have to talk to you. Dagrin, it's time. Time, yes. You know, you're in this one, Mother. I didn't ask. Nothing in a history book concerning me would be kind. Dagrin, please. It's time. Your time. He stood up suddenly. All the blood ran out of his dear little face. "Oh," he mumbled. "Oh. Muradin won't continue the negotiations without you. They've been counting minutes for you to come to age so they could be rid of me at last." "I'd rather it keep being you forever," he said quietly with such defeat in his voice. "No one gets what they want," I snapped. "Only the scraps from fate's table. Now you've got to decide, and I can't do it for you. The easy way or the hard way. Continue as one of the 3 squabbling clans in the council, or seize the throne of both your bloodlines and break it. But if you take the latter, you may pay for it in blood." Dagrin frowned. He never showed anger on his face. Most thought he had none of it in him, but I knew. His frown is another man's shriek. "And how am I to rule? Am I to be like Granda?" He turned to the page of a tome. My books say he's the reason father was slain. Or am I to be like you? He gestured at an open book. This says you were cruel and hasty, merciless. Is that what you want me to be? How should I not be angry? Oh, my love, books. They're such unfaithful things. Once you write something down, it's just exactly the same as if it really happened, even if it's not how the day itself went at all. I don't need to read that to know what it thinks of me. They'll tell you I was proud and unyielding, that I ruled with an iron fist. I ask you, what sort of fist was I meant to use in Casmodan? Better yet, what did I do that no king has done before and has been called great for it? He did not answer. He could not. There was no answer to that. Neither of us spoke for a long while. And anyway, I was young. Youth is foolishness, whether great or small. I am young too, Dagran said quietly. As for your grandfather, I continued quickly, I hated him. For years, it's all I thought of, but... Oh, did I really mean to say it? I did not want to, but you'll do so much for your only child. So much, even tell the truth. But he did the right thing, from his point of view. Dagran, who never knew his father, snapped his spectacled face towards mine. There was a flash of fire there at all. I don't believe that, and I don't think Granddad does either. Tears poured down my face. Did not feel them. This may be bitter soil to plant, my son, but it is spring, and you must, or there will be no harvest. The time for learning is over. The time for action has come, and I am so sorry it has. Please believe that if I could take this burden for you, I would. I would have long ago. I sighed and took a last glance at the half-finished painting. So skilled, so wasted. Look up when you leave this hall. Above the door, you will see your last lesson. There are flowers that grow on naked stone and thrive. Then report to the meeting hall to address the council 2 hours after dawn. My son straightened his shoulders, just as he had when he was small and running through these halls on a ribbon of laughter and dreams. He knew that proud little spine. He meant to talk back to me. The time for learning is never over. I set Angrid to prepare the morning meal and lay it out for the dignitaries to feast on before the council meeting began, hoping full stomachs might soften whatever is to come. She returned far too quickly. Madam, her fingers said brusquely, there is nothing for me. It is done. Impossible, I replied, already fastening my cloak around my shoulders and pulling on my boots. But it was not. When I entered the great room, I saw a table already groaning, clusters of nobles already loosening their belts to let their bellies breathe. Grunthan Windwhip's knee was bandaged below the board. He glared at me with one resentful eye. Excuse me, sir. Got a bit of a spasm in my throat. The table was perfect, each dish matched to each lord, each mug of ale carefully watered to fuzz tempers but not reason, and even the cutlery engraved with the seals of each dwarf's house and lineage. Dagran Tharasan II stood at the head, where he had been pushed all his life to stand, but he had set his table himself, relying on no servant to do his work. His fingers flashed briefly against his belt, quick and nimble. Mother, his fingers said, everything's going to be all right. I never taught him the signs Angrid and I devised so long ago. I never taught anyone. He had only watched for all his life and learned. Honored guests, the child began, and by the time he finished, he would be a child no longer. You are all fools. The piece of hunger sated vanished in a roar of fury from all assembled. Half a dozen hands went for half a dozen hilts. You are fools! Dagrin held up his hands. He did not bellow, he did not roar, he did not strike a blow to cow the rest, but they listened as they never had, even when I did all those things. Bastards. You are fools, and it is exhausting. I know books are less entertainment than hitting each other because your precious feelings got hurt. Feelings? Screeched Grunthin, a bloom of blood appearing on his bandage as his stitches popped free. I do apologize. Do you prefer honor? There's little enough difference. Watch your tongue, lad, warned my uncle. I have, very well. It's the tongues that have troubled me so. That, he gestured at the inscription on the great ancient shield, is no tongue recorded by any of the varied races of Azeroth. So why take the time to work it so finely into a shield? The gathered officials blinked in unison. Dagrin smiled patiently. A shield. What is a shield for? I confess I quite enjoyed watching these men who spat on me half my life squirm in their chairs like students who had shirked their lessons. Protecting the guts? One of the Bronzebeard's seconds ventured bravely. Yes, and in that capacity what tends to happen to shields? Dagrin led patiently. They get bashed in quite a fair bit, Muradin answered, beginning to catch on. Exactly. So why bother with all this fancy nonsense? Why take weeks upon weeks to paint and preserve and embed with jewels, to inscribe runes all the way round and cross the middle, to braid 3 metals together and filigree them like a lady's bracelet, just so someone can swing a mace into it and send all those pretty gems flying? I've seen your shields and mine. I've stretched leather and beaten iron to make them. We are practical people. We wouldn't throw away the richness of our minds and the skill of our greatest minds on a shield. A sword, perhaps. Parade armor, possibly. Crown, certainly. But a shield is not jewelry. It's a tool. And this is useless as a tool. Doubtful murmurs circled the table. More piles of pies and roast joints and fillets went into nervous gullets. Look at it. Every jewel's intact. If this shield ever saw a battle, there'd be but empty prongs left. But it's got blood on it, and it does bear marks of action, Thurn Barrelbane protested. Does it? Asked Dagrin thoughtfully, as though that had not yet occurred to him. Is that blood? Or is that paint? Or something even stranger? As for the little wounds on the metal here and there, Dagrin asked Grunthin for his Stormhammer, Thurn for a Warblade, me for my blade. He held each of them against the damage on the shield. None matched. Then the child who would be emperor pulled a small, delicate hammer and a pair of pincers from his own belt and laid them against the divots. The Explorers League tries to be careful, he chuckled ruefully. These are the marks of excavation tools. As for the blood, I will come to it in a moment. I have spent weeks in the library researching the sigils and marks, the workmanship of each aspect, the runes themselves, everything. And the answer is, you are all fools. Don't make them feel stupid, my fingers flashed a warning. You won't get to finish showing off. That shield was never meant to be used in battle. It's a memorial. It's an apology. And it's a promise. Look again, Wildhammer. There is your griffin, broken into parts that long to join, tragic, weeping, separate, unable to feast on the lamb alone, no matter how rich. Look again, Dark Iron. There is your fortress, burning beyond salvation. Look again, Bronzebeard. There is your goblet raised in the great halls of Ironforge, filled not with blood, but with wine, and all alone, without your comrades to feast alongside you. Dagrin raised his piercing eyes to me. Look again, Mother. It is not only a crown in the upper quadrant. It is a queen's crown. And thrust through it a single hammer. Not a war hammer. Just a hammer. A hammer to build, not to break. To raise up cities, not to raze them. This shield saw no battle, but it was crafted with all this care to tell a story. A story about what happens to our people when we war with one another. But we came together once. The three metals, iron, bronze, and gold. Dark iron, bronzebeard, wildhammer. We came together to swing our hammers for something greater than shattering bones or filling coffers. Before this mountain, before Modiums, before Bronzebeard and Wildhammer and Arc Iron, something in the ancient past, our people knew no division. All our clans were one. Under a queen who had a son with a builder's hands. Thurn rolled his eyes. How can you possibly know all that? Because I can read the runes, Dagran said simply. The trouble of it was the trouble of us, thinking those sigils were all one language, one clan's words, one clan's ideas, one clan's way of being. They're not. They're all three. Each room is a chimera, a beast formed in the parts of other creatures. Three of them. The long slash of ancient Wildhammer script here. His quick, clever fingers shaped the characters' anatomies in the air like a painter. The curt, blunt points of the lost dark iron runes there. The bold curve of dead Bronzebeard shorthand uniting them. Each letter follows this pattern. I would have seen that much more quickly if the chimera ended there. Instead, not only is each letter made of three scripts, but each word is formed from pieces of our most ancient languages, and the sentence itself uses a patchwork syntax. Dark iron verb conjugation, Wildhammer noun declension, Bronzebeard prepositions, and syntactic typology. Dagran was losing them. He became distracted by his own joy of study and puzzles, but a delight of having solved an impossible riddle, and the longing to share that, to show it off. My boy has delved far too deep in a mind that had no ore for these men. Come back, Dagran, I thought desperately. It's not enough to remember who you are. You must remember who they are. I opened my mouth to write the course of things, to do as I have always done, to guide and corral and make certain my child did not teeter too thoughtlessly on one of a million steep staircases down to a stone floor. But I did not. I opened my mouth and closed it again. I clenched my fingers tight. If he could not write his own course now, with these great men hanging on his words, he never would. No battle wound has pained me as much as sitting still did then. Never one. My child stopped, closed his eyes, cleared his throat, and began again. And if I am right, they are not just runes. They are a spell of restoration. If I speak the truth, it will show itself. Dagran Tharasan II ran his finger along the inscription on the crossbars. We are all fools, he read. Then he ran his finger around the words that rimmed the images. But fools no further, fools no further, fools no further, over and over again. The blackened, cracked, dried, and peeling blood shimmered and ran like paint, and in a moment, less than a moment, the shield swam with bright dwarven blood, wet and fresh and hot. Will you be fools then? Dagran said in a voice I did not even know he possessed. He brought his fist down on the shield with such might it cracked beneath his strength. Or will you be brothers? If it is the latter, I welcome you. If it's the former, I have no time for your games. I have no time for your games when there is so much to build. Stand in my way or do not, he continued. It makes no difference to me. Blood speaks true. Those are our ancestors, our fathers, our mothers, the actual people who lived and died only to become memories, symbols, the seals on your cups and the foods on your plate. They spent untold fortunes to craft a message that would last beyond eras. only to tell their foolish sons that they are family. If you wish to disrespect their honor, leave this hall and let it be your own affair. I will not. I will stay. I will work. I will build. With whoever is strong enough to hold a real hammer. Dagrin tossed the excavation tools on the broken shield and strode out of the room. Follow me and do not look behind you, his fingers urged. I did, and in that moment, truly I thought I could not be more proud of the child I brought into this dark world. They will stay, he said beyond the door, though I felt more certain in the planning. I could not imagine you would do so well, I said quietly. I touched his face, my own baby's face, never to be so young again. How did you finally solve the runes? You seemed so lost yesterday. You said it was impossible. Dagrin Tharasan II smiled softly at me. This place is full of eyes and ears, and only some of them are Angrids. I don't understand. It was all so perfect. You found the solution. There was the boy in him again, practically wriggling with excitement to tell me how naughty he'd been. I told you, the shield is nothing. The shield itself, I mean. I told the truth. That thing was never made to be used in battle. It could not have been. It's too fine, too dear. And all those soft metals and jewels make it brittle. Those ancient dwarves made it not to fight, but to speak. Mother, do you not understand? To speak to us, down through the centuries. They knew themselves. They knew each other. They knew when their fight was over, so their unity would be. They knew it would all happen again, inevitably, again. So they made this great object and set it down the lines of their houses to their great-great-great-grandchildren, like a message in a falcon's mouth. And their falcon was time. Dagrin laughed dryly, ruefully. I do get carried away, don't I? Then why not make it such a letter easy enough for anyone to read, I asked. It makes no sense. But it makes every sense. What would you think if you found some bit of scrap metal that said, "You're stupid"? You'd adore it flat out, and so would everyone else. No, this was the only way to make sure anyone would value it. If it was rich enough and strange enough, indecipherable enough, then all the clans would have to come together to argue and fight over it, to claim it for their own. And together, perhaps, there might be enough of them that they would have all the pieces needed to comprehend the enormity of what our ancestors were trying to do, what they were trying to say, which is the same thing you and Angrid said with your flowers, your music, your food. Remember who you are, because who you are is what we are. That shield and that vase of blossoms are the same gesture by another hand. No, it had to be a puzzle so good that no one could comprehend it. Dagrin smiled to himself, and in that moment he looked so much older, so terribly grown. As are we all, I suppose. Oh, I can't imagine how long it took to plan, to bargain, to spin out gold as fine as thread, hammer out jewels as thin as ice over a wither basin, to devise the gambit. It must have been... Mother, I think it must have been someone like me who did it, who thought it into being and summoned the falcon to fly it into a world he would never know, the light of days on the other side of his own allotted span, or hers. I narrowed my eyes. I know my son. I do know him. You couldn't help adding your flourish to that lost soul's work, could you? Dagrin glanced up at me through his lashes with a shine in eyes. I may have helped a little with the blood spell. Linguistics are quite enough to excite me. I suspected my great uncle and his peers would need something more obvious. I wanted to laugh and whisper and take apart every moment of his victory with him as we used to do when he was small and his only battles were with wooden dwarves and bathtub trolls. Tell him how I have done something not so different in my youth. Show him my pride by showing him how alike we are. But I did not. I could not. I did not want to take from his deed by plastering it with my own. making his virtue mine, leaning over him like a shadow he could not escape to find a light he could own. I can learn. I can. Mother, I knew this day would come, and I knew I would not be ready, he went on. I had to be better than them. I had to find my own game, because I could never win at theirs, any more than you could. And it will work now. It will. I know it. For a while, at least. It's only ever for a while, until the need for a falcon comes again. He gripped my shoulders and pressed his forehead against mine. I thought my heart would burst open. Say you're proud. Say I am your son and you see me. You see in me what was taken from you. I see you. My child, my son. I see you, I whispered through my tears. I was wrong about him. We all were, only they have yet to discover it. He was always my flower, my lilac growing in the most difficult way. But maybe we all are. Flowers beneath the stone. Maybe we all tangle inside. Maybe we scream and charge and stomp and frown, because we know if the armor over our true heart slips even once, this world will eat our petals whole. After all, the lilac is no less of the earthen than we, no less than the petrified rock on which it must grow. But only Dagrin ever stood bare before horrors and told them all he was both at once and would rule them anyway. He was stronger than any of us who lived. Even me. I was never strong enough to stay soft. And as I watched him turn back to a room he would own forever the moment he entered, a room not one single lord had dared to leave, I became my father at last. Hard as a diamond, barely able to move for the weight of my own history, watching the future slip in between the cracks before anyone realized it was already here. Yeah, the dwarves had lots of problems. They've always been at war with each other. So I can see that, they make a peace treaty and then all of a sudden, oh, here we go again with the fighting. Makes sense. Oh my goodness. I don't know why my throat decided to just lock up a bit there. 1 second. That's still playing in the background. That's good. Alright. So that's all the short stories that they have released so far. So to continue on for the next hour, we are going to start The Dawn of the Aspects. This is about as early in history that they have done for any of the timeline in Warcraft. This is a story about Galakrond, which they have apparently now retconned, thanks to Newser. And how the 5 aspects became who they were. As I said, what we call proto-dragons are actually dragons of Azeroth, and what we would call a dragon that we would recognize is not of Azeroth. Just like everybody looks quite different than what we would expect in any other fantasy. Like elves and humans and such. Everybody looks off in some ways. There's a reason. It gives that nice alien feeling. that these are not your basic fantasy type races, honestly. So, dragons, what we call a dragon in Warcraft, is a titan uplifting of what we also call a proto dragon, and that's not correct nomenclatures for them. So, all right, I know Richard Knaak. I we're we're birthday twinsies. I talk to him every now and then on Facebook, and very nice guy. Um, he's a good writer. He wrote The Legend of Huma for Dragonlance, and the sequel to that, Kaz the Minotaur. Um, he's wrote his own series of books on his own race of minotaurs on a different world when he came up with. So he's not just a shared world author. But it seems that you gotta take this in a way that for some reason when they had commissioned Knaak for doing books for Warcraft, it usually had some kind of time travel shenanigans to it. Um, you will see it in this one. It deals with Kalik messing around with a Titan artifact, and he ends up seeing things from when, like, his parent, who's Malagos, um, and his siblings, which are the will become the other aspects, had to deal with Galakrond. So there's going to be a lot of going back and forth in this story. Anytime you see a Knaak book, it's going to be like that. I think that's how they directed him for how they wanted the story to go. I'm not quite sure, but because it doesn't always happen. I don't remember if that happened with like Wolfheart or Stormrage. The dragon is. Um, so War of the Ancients is another time traveler type story. So, you know, we'll be bopping back and forth between present time, which this is set. I'm trying to think when this is set. There's the cover of it. It's a 5-part serial. And here you can see, like, there's Alexstrasza as Malagos, Therian, Ysera, and I forget his name. Boy, I'm stupid. So, but you see that they look like proto-dragons, right? Because that's what dragons are supposed to be. And this big belly over here is Galakrond. I'm trying to remember when they actually set Calyx part. I'm trying to remember. I guess it really doesn't matter. It's after Malagos has been taken down, and now Kalik has to step up and try to become an aspect of magic instead. All right. His vague shadow passed over the immense structure below as he circled to land. Even though he had been here before, the scope and age of the stone temple and its surroundings still struck him hard. The temple rose several levels high, with each level built for a race obviously towering over humans and orcs. The rows of grooved columns that lined the outside from the circular base to the rounded top stood like an army of sentinels surveying every desolate direction of the chilling dragon wastes. The long fangs of ice draped the ancient edifice, and vicious cracks ran through many of the columns and curved archways. But despite the ravages of time and the severe, fierce conflicts that had engulfed it, Wormrest stood defiant, eternal. It was, to him, a welcome contrast to the horrific and seemingly endless transformations plaguing the world of Azeroth. The others would already be here. He peered at the distant shrines to each of the great dragonflights. Bronze, emerald, azure, ruby, and obsidian, surrounding Wormrest. They were shrines without purpose now, the dragonflights in disarray or decimated. Even Wormrest, though it might not stand 10 millennia more, risked being nothing but a relic of a time and hope long past. The great blue dragon sighed and began his descent. As he did, his gaze briefly shifted far beyond the temple and the shrines to the north, where unsettling mountains dotted the icy landscape. He quickly looked away. Each mound was the frost-encrusted corpse of a dragon. Some of the mounds dated thousands upon thousands of years back. The dragon wastes were the graveyard of hundreds of his kind, whatever their color. It was a grim reminder that even the mightiest of creatures were not invulnerable. The winged Leviathan focused again on his destination. Wormrest seemed to swell before his eyes. By the time he neared one of the entrances at the base, the dragon was dwarfed by the temple. He alighted and then, with one last glance around, stepped inside. The interior did nothing to lessen the sense of enormity, the first chamber rising more than 3 times the dragon's height. Torches that still stayed lit despite the millennia gave some weak illumination. Ancient carvings loomed over him, many of them of indistinct figures with some resemblance to humans or elves, and yet were clearly not. Whether these were meant to represent the Titans, the godlike beings who had brought order to the chaos and reshaped Azeroth to its current form, or it had been carved with some other intent, the dragon did not know. This place had been built long before his time indeed, long before the time of dragons in general. No one knew the reason for its construction, but long ago it had become the meeting place for the greatest of his kind, the Aspects, guardians of not only all dragons, but all Azeroth. Here, over the millennia, the 5 champions had assembled to coordinate the actions of the dragonflights. Here, during the Nexus War, in which the aspect of magic had led the Blue Dragonflight in an attempt to purge Azeroth of all mortal spellcasters who did not bow to his utter control, the leaders of the 3 other dragonflights had created the Wormrest Accord, an annual gathering in which they discussed what courses of action to take in regard to the oft precarious future of the world. Here, after the War of the Ancients, where demons had invaded Azeroth and ancient Kalimdor had been sundered, 4 of them, Malygos at that time still very much included, had come to determine their next step to counter the treachery of one of their own. The last had become one of the predominant tasks, but even that long struggle paled against what had actually been their primary goal since the beginning, nothing less than preventing the hour of twilight, when all life on Azeroth would become extinct. That extraordinary victory had at last been achieved, at the greatest cost for the Aspects. Now here, for the first time since the ancient edifice had been chosen as their meeting place, the 4 remaining former Aspects came not as the world's champions, but simply as themselves. Okay, so this is after Cataclysm. The dragons descended into a gorge carved into the ice, arriving at the lowest half-buried portion of the temple. He listened, but heard no voices rising from within. It was possible that he had arrived before the others after all. He considered departing the temple and finding a nearby place to wait until one of the others turned up. For even after reassurance from the others, he still felt that as the youngest it was not his place to be first among them in any manner. but finally proceeded. But as the scaled behemoth had entered the lower levels, he finally heard one of the others, Nosdormu, trust the bronze dragon to still be the timeliest of them even now. What the other males said, the blue dragon could not make out. However, the reply of the one with whom Nosdormu spoke came clear. We shall wait until we are all here, a soft but commanding female voice answered. Caligos deserves as much respect in that regard as any of us. Hearing his name, the blue dragon surged forward. Not only was he not first, he had clearly kept the others waiting. I am here, the blue roared. He entered a wide circular chamber, the center of which contained a raised marble platform, reachable by steps at the northern and southern points of the compass. Each corner of the platform was also topped by a huge column. Nosdormu turned his sharp gaze to the newcomer, the gargantuan bronze dragon flanked by two females, equally imposing in size and majesty. The long, sleek, emerald green dragon to the bronze's right stared unblinking at the blue with rainbow-colored orbs. Ysera, once she of the dreaming, she for millennia of the ever-closed eyes, now never shut them even for an instant. She nodded to Caligos, but did not speak. At Nosdormu's other side, a majestic crimson female took a few steps toward the blue. In size and girth, she outdid any of the three, but there was a gentleness about her that belied her fearsome appearance. A long crest stretched down from her back to her tail, and the blue dragon knew that if she stretched her wings, their expanse would be wide enough to obscure her two companions. 3 other dragons of slightly lesser size bowed their heads at his arrival. Each of the 3 stood positioned on the white platform behind their former aspect, whose color they matched. These were among the most trusted, the most battle-tested of the who had served the champions. Champions, when they say that in the story, any stories, that means the player characters. Just so you know. Caligos knew each from the swift and ready Chronormu, or Chromie as she referred to by those nearest her, to brave Merithra, daughter of Ysera. Of the 3, though, he was probably the most familiar with Crimson Aphrodisias, he who had once been commander of Wormrest's defenses during the struggle against the Twilight's Hammer, the fanatical cults that had tried to hasten the end of Azeroth. The later trio remained quiet and in the background. They were here to listen. Their presence reminded him once again that he, too, should have been accompanied. The only problem was there had no longer been anyone left in the Nexus to do that. There's no thing to fear, Caligos, the lead red dragon calmly responded to his outburst, her voice melodic, calming. We knew that you would be along shortly. Nosdormu merely expressed concern for you. Did you not, Nosdormu? As you say, the bronze replied vaguely. His voice bespoke age and wisdom, even though, like the others, he appeared in the fullness of life. You are too kind. The blue bowed his long crested head towards the elder dragons, then to the crimson female added, Kalik, if you please, Alexstrasza. Nosdormu snorted, but Alexstrasza nodded. Kalik, forgive me for forgetting your preferred, what do younger races call it? A nickname. But I thought you only liked to use it when in a humanoid form. Of late, I've come to prefer it at all times. Kalik did not elaborate. Perhaps we should all have nicknames, Ysera interjected without a hint of sarcasm. After all, it is their world now. Indeed, I find I spend more time of late in a humanoid form than I do in this, my birth one. Perhaps that would be the best and quickest way to close our era. Her blunt words silenced the other 3. After a moment clearly uncomfortable to all of them, Alexstrasza moved to take up a position at the very center of the wide dais. The other 3 followed suit. Nosdormo moving to the southern edge, Ysera to the east, and Kalik to the north. The west, Neltharian's place, had remained empty since this ancient betrayal. The red dragon surveyed the others, then gazing up for a moment she declared, "Let this gathering of the Accord begin." Once this pronouncement would have been accompanied by some magical spectacle, but such displays were a thing of the past. Fearsome these four behemoths might still be, but guardians of Azeroth they were not. They had sacrificed their roles as aspects in order to vanquish once and for all the monstrous black dragon Deathwing. Deathwing, he who had once been their comrade, Neltharion, and who, in his evil madness, had nearly succeeded in bringing about the hour of twilight. It had been a worthy sacrifice, but Kalik was well aware that in its wake it had left all four forever altered. Kalik surreptitiously studied the Elder Three. He had come only lately into the role of aspect of magic, grudgingly accepting both it and rule over the blue dragonflight after the downfall of his predecessor and lord, Malygos. Malygos, also called the Spellweaver, had grown tired of what he considered the misuse of arcane magic by the lesser races, and had finally declared that such power was to be entrusted only to dragons and their allies. The Nexus War had swept across Azeroth and had ended only when, with the aid of Alexstrasza and a handful of her drakes, a band of heroes had entered the heart of his domain, the Nexus itself, and had regretfully put an end to both Malygos and his monstrous crusade. Seeking a new leader, the Blue Dragons had turned to the members of their flight who, through events, had proven to be the one whom they could trust most to lead, Kalik. The Blue waited, but no one spoke. Even Alexstrasza seemed uninterested in continuing beyond calling the Accord to order. The Lifebinder appeared to be waiting for one of the others to take control, something that neither Ysera nor Nosdormo showed the slightest inclination of doing. But others did. Growing more visibly impatient than ever Kalik felt, Chromie broke the silence. "If I may be permitted, there's a matter of concern. The time-ways appear to be in flux. It may have to do with when the dragon soul was seized." Nosdormo cut her off. "The time-ways are no longer our concern. They are beyond my ability to control. From here on, the younger races and the younger races will deal with both them and whatever plans to the future they lead to." Kornormu obviously wanted to say more, but instead nodded. However, as she withdrew, Ysera's daughter dared speak up. "Perhaps I speak out of turn also, but there has been rumors that the nightmare stirs in the Rift of Ulm. It may be seeking a new puppet, another nightmare lord that will help it again reach from the Emerald Dream into the waking world. We have discussed this," Ysera pointedly reprimanded the other green. The former aspect's expression momentarily changed. "I think we did." Yes, we did. The rift and the corruption still touching the Emerald Dream will be dealt with by the Druids." "Yes, the Druids. The Night Elf Narlax has already led an effort and has seen the nightmare sealed off. The Druids will call against the nightmare more ably than we can now." The speech was a far more focused, more concentrated one than those Kalik had heard from Ysera shortly after the Green's loss of her aspect role and its powers. Then Ysera had seemed absent-minded and unable to articulate her thoughts well. Since that time, however, her mind had clearly made strides in regaining much of what it had lost. Marithra looked deflated. "As you say, Mother." Once again an easy silence reigned over the assembly. A Phrasastras, wiser than the other two subordinates, looked disinclined to add his own voice. Kalik suddenly felt acutely aware of the lack of anyone at his own side. I'm going to take a pause a moment. I'm just looking at this dragon's name. I I wonder if they ever renamed this dragon. He's named that, if I'm right, he's named after that one guy that they let go, quote unquote, for his actions, quote unquote, in the company. Yeah, I hope they renamed him too. All right, I'm going to continue. It was as if time had stopped. No one even moved. Finally, well aware that it was his youth in part that stirred his impatience beyond his ability to command, Kalik blurted, "I would speak." With only the mildest visible curiosity, the other leviathans looked his way. A sense of intimidation washed over Kalik, but he quickly recognized it as his own uncertainty, not any disdain on their part. His life, as tragic as much as it had been, was less than nothing compared to the combined suffering of these venerable beings. That he had been considered an equal even for a time still daunted him. "Well," Ysera finally responded, "if you wish to speak, then you should speak. Simple enough." Kalik was a little taken aback by her directness. Ysera had been the dreamer. Now she saw nothing but waste in dreaming or even hesitating. "The contents of the Nexus, is that all it is about?" She looked even less interested than before. "The concerns of any one dragonflight are its alone, you know that. Does your subject concern the rest of us in any way?" "Not directly. Not directly. Then it doesn't, which means that discussion is at an end. Indeed, there doesn't seem to be any relevant discussion thus far." Turning to Alexstrasza, Ysera grumbled, "I told you, didn't I? I certainly remember wanting to." Yes, I did. I told you. I thought it was a mistake even bothering to gather here, my sister. We have always met at this cycle of the twin moons. It would have been disrespectful not to." Nosdormu snorted again. "Disrespectful? To whom? A loon? The Mother Moon has her night elves to worship her. Disrespectful to the Titans or their servants, the Keepers? We do not even know if the Titans exist anymore. It is certainly not disrespectful to us." "I agree with you, Sarah. This was a mistake. There is no point to the Accord anymore. If this gathering has any purpose to it, it should be to finally put the Accord to rest and let each of us move on with our own problems." Kalik was stunned by the unexpected course of the brief conversation. He waited breathlessly for Alexstrasza to calm the other two down, but the Lifebonder did not argue. Indeed, Alexstrasza seemed to mull over Nosdormu's suggestion. This is a tremendous merit. The blue dragon abandoned his position, moving toward the center and in front of Alexstrasza as he faced the bronze. "But the Accord is not nearly about us. It's become the backbone of all draconic interaction over the millennia. The Accord kept order amongst our flights, prevented catastrophe more than once. We know that if we were united, there would always be hope." "United," Ysera cut in. "Yes, we have been very united over the millennia, have we not? Neltharion, Malagos." She looked as if she intended to say more, but with an apologetic glance at Nosdormu, she quieted. "Do not leave me out," the bronze grimly added. He stretched his wings. "Call him Murozond, Lord of the Infinite Dragon Flight, if you like, but that accursed dragon was my far future self's, and so I am to blame for his evils, just as Neltharion was to blame for what he later did as Deathwing." Alexstrasza inserted herself at the center again. "Nay, Nosdormu, no one here finds fault with you for what you have not done. You fought alongside others against Murozond and altered that future forever. Had there been even the remotest blame on your part, it was erased with Murozond's undoing." Kalik and Ysera dipped their heads in agreement. The bronze's tail slowly slid back and forth, a sign of gratitude for such words. Then his mood darkened again. Yes, I fought my future self when I had the power to fight. Now we, are as any other dragon. The time of the aspects is past, and I say thus that the time of the rest accord is also. Again, Kalik noted no disagreement from the sisters. But the three of you are the combined wisdom of our kind. The aspects have always... Ysera thrust her snout into his face. We are not aspects. But the three of you are still... We understand your concern, Kalik, Alexstrasza said with such clear pity that Kalik winced. But our time is done, and Azeroth must look to other defenders. As she finished, Nosdormu strode past them towards one of the exits. Ysera followed suit. Kalik could not believe what he was seeing. Where are you going? The bronze Leviathan looked over his shoulder. Home. We are done here. We should not have even bothered to have this gathering. He is correct on the last score, the Lifebinder agreed reluctantly. And only then did Kalik realize that they had been thinking of all of them in terms of titles they themselves clearly no longer acknowledged. They were, in their own eyes, simply 3 dragons among many now. Alexstrasza, surely you at least. It was as if his mother stared down at him. The pity had been replaced by care. Azeroth will survive without us. You who were thrust only so recently into all this, you will survive without us. Alexstrasza looked to the departing bronze. Nosdormu, a moment. We will meet once more in a month. If we are to dissolve the accord, we shall do so with proper respect. He paused and glanced back. You're correct. Does deserve the proper burial. Agreed. 1 month from this day. The gargantuan red focused on her sister. Ysera? I agree. It makes perfect sense. Alexstrasza faced Kalik. So shocked that he was unable to speak. He vehemently shook his head. 3-1, the female red murmured. So, it is decided. Nosdormu had not even waited for a declaration. The bronze and his lieutenant already moving on. Ysera and her daughter were close behind. Alexstrasza watched them for a moment, then turned and, with a grace incredible even for a dragon, slipped out behind Nosdormu and her sister. Aphrodite hesitated only long enough to give the blue a sympathetic expression before following her. Kalik had no choice but to follow or to be left alone. Yet despite his youth and swiftness, by the time he reached the outside, the others were already in the midst of going their separate ways. Please reconsider, he roared, his pleas echoing throughout the wastes. Kalik's mind was awhirl. He had actually come here with troubles of his own that he had hoped to discuss with one or more of the elder dragons, and instead he found himself trying desperately just to keep the one seemingly eternal accord together. Nosdormu spread his wings to their full span and took to the sky without so much as last glance at the younger dragon. He was already a small dot when Ysera decided to speak one final time. In truth, we considered... Yes, we did. All of this long ago. We just needed one of us to speak it. The emerald behemoth leaped up into the air. It was only chance that it happened here, barely after you arrived. I apologize for that, young Kalik. And then there remained only Alexstrasza and him. Fare you well, Kalik. I'm sorry that you came all this way for only a few empty moments, and such a turn of events as you certainly did not expect or deserve to be confronted by. With that, the Great Red took off, leaving a speechless Kalik to watch as the 3 vanished among the dark clouds and shrouded not only the wastes, but nearly all of the bleak continent in Northrend. What happened here? The Blue asked himself over and over. What just happened here? For a brief time, Kalec had thought that things might be taking a turn for the better when he agreed to stay in Dalaran and, as the mage Khadgar suggested, joined the Kirin Tor. But soon, Kalec had seen the distrust in the eyes of the other Magi. He was a blue dragon. That was all that mattered to them. In the end, he had made excuses to Jaina, citing the need to oversee the Nexus's crumbling defensive spells and gather its substantial and powerful collection of artifacts together. Kalec had actually looked forward to this gathering, hoping for some encouragement on several fronts. His own dragonflight had all but fallen apart. With the debacle concerning the focusing iris and its theft, he had felt that he had failed in every regard as a leader, and that had led to the mass exodus of the other blue dragons. The Nexus had become a place of emptiness, and at times Kalec had found himself without the inclination to truly fight their departures. And now the ones to whom he had truly sought to turn had themselves turned from the world. A further irony was that despite wanting to come here, Kalec had considered not making the journey. He had been ashamed at his failure to find the focusing iris and the dreadful events that had come to pass because of that, especially the destruction of Jaina's own realm of Theramore. Kalec had at first not wanted to admit his humiliations to those who had considered him their equal despite the incredible difference in age and experience. Yet in the end, Kalec had chosen to come, only to find himself in this new debacle. A chill ran down his spine that had nothing to do with the elements. The blue dragon looked back at Wormrest Temple, once a place of legend to him. Now he suspected that he was staring at it, if not for the last time, then likely the next to last. Without the Accord, there was only one reason to come to this stark land. That was to die. But for all his misery, Kalec was not yet ready for death. His youth might be a key factor in his failures, but it also urged him on, even if he had no idea what to do next. The wind picked up. Its rush through the temple, creating a surreal howl that finally stirred the Blue to begin his own departure. With a beat of his wings, he rose high. Once airborne, the urge to be far from Wormrest magnified. Kalec focused on the direction home and increased his pace. But just as he left Wormrest behind, something nagged at his senses. Although no longer an aspect, Kalec was still a blue dragon and thus more attuned to arcane magic in all its varied forms. The trace was so unique that despite his mood, Kalec sought out its source. But a first glance at the landscape below failed to give the dragon any clue as to where it lay. Concentrating, Kalec managed to better pinpoint the general area. The catastrophe in the temple momentarily forgotten, the Blue descended for a closer look. His path took him over the remains of more than one dragon, despite the preservative qualities of the constant cold weather. The wind and other elements eventually wore away all recognizable traces of the dead. Even those already reduced to bone would someday not even be recognizable for the massive proud beasts that they had once been. After what had happened in the temple, the finality of the scene below struck him anew, but he continued down despite misgivings. And then at last he sensed from where exactly the magical emanations originated. Kalec veered in that direction and came to a jarring halt in the air. So stunned was he by what he beheld that it was all he could do to remember to keep flapping his wings. It was perhaps its gargantuan size that had permitted the skeleton to remain nearly intact even after so very long. Yet almost as arresting as its incredible dimensions was the angle at which it lay. Nearly all the other frozen remains scattered through the vast, isolated region lay as if those dragons had simply gone to sleep. Indeed, most had done just so, landing and, with the aid and comfort of others of their kind, breathing their last with relatively little suffering. Not so this mammoth creature. This leviathan had died violently, and so, in the bloody process, had many, many others. The cracked muzzle of the skull revealed part of a huge maw that could have engulfed Kalik. The lower jaw was nowhere to be seen. The neck area twisted in an awkward manner that revealed just how devastating the collision with the ground had been. The torso, too, lay violently twisted. The spine arched at an impossible angle. The half-buried ribs formed a winding tunnel that rivaled the great chambers of the temple in height. Within that macabre passage, Kalik pinpointed the location of the mysterious emanations. The dragon shuddered, feeling a sense of dread. Then, steeling himself, the blue leviathan dived in among the gigantic frosty bones. Dived in among the bones of the father of dragons, Galakrond. Kalik landed within the ribs of some lingering trepidation. Even though he knew it was only his imagination, there was the constant feeling that the bones might now stir, that Galakrond would rise and engulf him. Even the howling of the wind through the bones seemed to take on a supernatural life, as if the spirits of all the dead dragons here tried to warn him of his folly. But Kalik still remained more driven by his curiosity. Besides, he had nothing to return to at the moment except more troubles. The blue had to crouch as he neared the location he sought. So deep had Galakrond's corpse sunk into the harsh soil. That added a claustrophobic touch to an already uneasy situation. But still Kalik was undeterred. He had never sensed a magical trace such as this, and found it most curious that it should happen near a place that he had visited more than once. At first it occurred to him that perhaps someone had recently set it into place. After all, the rotting servants of the undead scourge had spent much time excavating the skeleton, their leader hoping to animate the bones and create a monstrous frost worm. However, they had been driven away before they could dig too deep, and from what Kalik sensed, what he sought was buried very, very far down. With that in mind, the blue could not help but think that whatever drew him here had lain undisturbed for a long, long time, likely since these remains had fallen here. The dragon concentrated and then exhaled. A purple sphere formed in the air, then drifted gently to the spot. As it touched the soil, a slight mist arose. Under Kalik's guidance, the magical globe melted away thousands upon thousands of years of frost and ice, then slowly burrowed into the ground beneath. But barely had Kalik's spell pushed below the surface than the sphere faded. Despite the blue's best efforts to keep the spell intact, the globe finally dissipated far short of its goal. Peering in frustration at the shallow hole, Kalik stretched his forepaws wide. Arcade bands of energy draped over the hole, scratching away the ground. As if guided by invisible hands, the bands continued to scrape away at the spot as Kalik watched. The blue dragon's eyes finally narrowed in satisfaction as the hole grew deeper and deeper. Images flashed through his mind. A yellowish proto-dragon arguing with an orange one. A charcoal gray proto-dragon laughing harshly. A robed and hooded figure, a humanoid figure with one arm visible. A white proto-dragon shrieking as it shriveled to a skeleton. Another dragon, faint hints of green remaining, flying towards Kalik. Dry skin hung limply on rotting bone, and the eyes of the oncoming creature were milky white and without life, and yet still it charged forward, ready to strike. With a roar, Kalik stumbled back. He crashed into the ribcage, which, sealed in place by layer upon layer of ice, not only held against the dragon's blue weight, but left the dragon momentarily stunned by the collision. What just happened? Kalik shook his head, denied the whole. At some point, the second spell had also faded, but for the moment, Kalik cared only about the visions. They had been so lifelike that he had felt as if he had been there participating in the brief scenes. Yet none of the images made any sense, especially the last. Exceedingly ominous, too. Shaking his head again, the Blue investigated the hole. More than ever, he could sense the source of the emanations very near. He only had to dig a little deeper. Rather than risk a third spell, Kalik hunched over and began tearing at the dirt and frost with his claws. Digging still required great effort, but he made respectable progress. The emanations grew stronger, yet no more visions assailed him. A soft lavender aura rose from the hole. Kalik immediately hesitated. When nothing else happened, he cautiously dug around the edges. At first he was rewarded only with more dirt, but as Kalik shifted his attention to the center, his claws finally came into contact with something other than earth. With a delicate touch of his reptilian form belied, the dragon brought forth a small octagonal object made from some metal that Kalik could not identify. It reminded him of gold, but if he held it in a different way, it looked as if it were simple iron. Tilted in another direction, it took on the brilliant white appearance of rare palladium. And all the while, the lavender aura surrounding it, yet also seemed separate, as if it were clouds over a tiny, oddly shaped world. Fascinated, Kalik sought to probe the mysterious artifact. The moment he tried, though, the aura faded. The Blue quickly ceased his probing, but the aura did not return. Indeed, now the emanations had also ceased. The dragon growled. He almost put the tiny artifact down, but finally clutched it tight. Backing up, Kalik noticed a spot where the gap between ribs was wide enough for him to exit. As he stepped out in the open, the gnawing feeling that he was being watched overtook him. Kalik looked to the right. The empty eye sockets of the father of dragons met his gaze. Kalik let out a grim laugh at his momentary paranoia. He glanced down at the artifact one more time in order to make certain his grip was good, then took to the heavens. As the Blue left the desolation below, he found himself breathing much easier. Kalik grunted and turned his attention to the Nexus. There, he thought he might be able to find out more about the object he carried. The Blues had gathered much arcane knowledge during Malagos's millennia as aspect of magic, and even though Kalik himself no longer bore that title, the knowledge was still his for the studying. That there were no other more pressing matters, such as the dissolution of the Blue Dragon flight itself, had never left his thoughts. The artifact gave him a perfect excuse not to think about his latest failures, just as fulfilling the dangerous role of aspect had once let him now and then try to forget Anvina. The Blue Dragon grimaced, then shook away such thoughts. Kalik arched. Wormrest Temple briefly came into view below. The Blue hissed. Like the thing in his paw, it was a relic of the past, but unlike the artifact, for Kalik, the temple held no more interest. It was as dead a thing to him as the bones from which he had just departed, and as dead as the future that he had once thought awaited him as an aspect. The Nexus was more than merely the realm of the Spellweaver and the Blue Dragonflight. It was a place of immense magical power, a gathering of forces from all Azeroth. Although its physical appearance was that of an icy, time-worn fortress, the Nexus was actually a formation riddled with tunnels and caves, and had once been protected by an extensive and intricate series of wards that prevented only the Blue Dragon's safe entrance. However, with the wards fading, Kalik's excuses for returning had more merit to it than he had originally thought. Some distance away, 2 blue dragons soared through the air. Both headed south. Whether intending to ever return, Kalik did not know. He tried not to think about their departure as he neared. Although Kalek had been late to the gathering at Wormrest, his tardiness has not been due to having to fly any great distance than Alexstrasza and the rest. The Nexus was actually based on the frozen island of Kodara, situated near the northwest edge of the Borean tundra, which itself was a part of Northrend, the very same continent containing the Dragon Wastes. In truth, the journey had been a relatively short one. Kalek had been last to the Accord for reasons that he believed would have shocked even the legendary three. But all thought of either her or the Accord faded as Kalek entered the protective perimeter of the Nexus. He felt a gentle tingle as he passed through the invisible network of spells. For now they still held, but they were already getting weaker than when he had left for the gathering. Kalek entered through the passage that led into his sanctum. Again and again he sensed the brief, almost negligible touch of the active spells. How much longer they would last he could not say. Not too long, though. There was a sound from ahead. Another male suddenly crossed his path. Kalek, not expecting anyone in the Nexus, came to a abrupt halt. "Hail, Spellweaver," the older dragon intoned, at the same time bowing his head. It said something for the size of the passages that both not only could face each other with ease, but would be able to pass by when necessary. Shaking his head, Kalek replied, "That title is no longer mine, Jerichos." "As you wish. I am glad that you returned when you did. I would have felt extremely guilty otherwise." Kalek tried to head off what he knew was coming. "Jerichos, you don't... Please, I must speak." Although older, the other blue was smaller than Kalek. "I have loyally followed the Spellweaver my entire existence, be the one with the title Malagos or you. I have entered fierce battle, pursued dangerous quests, and never shirked in any other duty." "I know that. You are one of those I always admired. You never sought glory for yourself. It is something I had tried to emulate." The elder dragon cleared his throat, a sound that echoed through the rocky passage. He looked down. "You make this only harder. Kalek, I had notions I had long wished to pursue. Interest in the Ukraine I never had the chance to study. To do so, I must travel far. You need not feel guilty for telling me this, Jerichos," Kalek interjected softly. "I respect your choice and thank you for coming to me rather than simply departing without a word. To be honest, I thought when you'd left earlier you were never coming back." The other dragon dipped his head in respect. "I will return on occasion. Thank you. Safe journey." With another dip of his head, the second behemoth moved on. Kalek watched him for a moment, then continued on in silence toward his sanctum. He had his doubts as to whether Jerichos would ever return. After all, Kalek had encouraged his fellow blue dragons to do as they desired, even if it meant forever following a path that took them farther and farther from the Nexus. "Do not argue, Neltharion," a hissing voice roared in Kalek's mind. "I do not argue, I fight." A stunning wave of vertigo overtook Kalek as the mysterious voices continued to argue. Images began to join them. A young yellowish dragon with some resemblance to one he knew now. A high peak that reminded him of one to the east, only sharper, less polished by time. Through the barrage of mixing voices and flashing images he heard a female blue calling to him. Her voice was distant, indistinct, while the others grew stronger, more vivid. A dragon roared, and just as Kalek lost sense, he realized it was he. Hunting had been good. The ICC teemed with large creatures full of tasty meat and blubber. Some of his kind preferred to hunt the grazers, and they too could provide a welcome feast. But for the time being, Malagos Try that again. But for the time being, Malagos enjoyed seeking the shapes of only half seen in the depths, and planning for the very moment when they drew near the surface. He liked a mental challenge, more so than the other proto-dragons. Malagos took special pride in that. It meant to him that he was far more clever. The blue and white proto-dragon marked one last prey. He spread his wings, which were decorated with icy flakes. More than most, his particular kind was well adapted to this region. Other families occasionally ventured up here, but the majority tend to stay in the warmer climes. Yet today was to be one of those rare visitations. The shadow rushed over Malagos, soaring ahead at a speed he would have been hard-pressed to match. Kalik peered up in the sky in search of the other. Kalik! My name is Kalik! A part of Malagos suddenly thought with shock. What is happening? He wanted to turn and race back to the Nexus, but his body did not obey. Instead, it rose higher into the sky, seeking the mysterious proto-dragon whose shadow had passed by. It was not unheard of for members of one kind to attack another. Dominance was always important amongst proto-dragons. How do I know that? Kalik demanded helplessly. Where am I? Kalik could recall nothing after his agonizing roar. He had apparently been unconscious. After that, he had no explanation as to why he would be here, flying over the water and seeing things through the eyes of Malagos. Kalik did not even understand how he knew that the body was that of his predecessor, or how he also recognized that this was a very young Malagos from an era before there existed true dragons, much less the great aspects. Kalik/Malagos rose into the clouds. The proto-dragon sniffed the air, enabling Kalik to detect the presence of that other creature. It seemed that the blue could experience everything here, but had no choice as to movement or speech. It was as if he were a ghost, sharing Malagos's form, even though the truth was more complicated. This young Malagos was the spirit, as was the entire world surrounding them, Kalik suspected. Suddenly, a fire-orange shape darted by, distracting both Malagos and Kalik. A female proto-dragon hesitated a short distance from the blue and white male. No battle, she roared. I mean no harm. Several new things shocked Kalik. First, what little he knew of proto-dragons had led him to believe that they were incapable of speech. He had assumed them the primitive animalistic ancestors of his kind and nothing more. But somewhere along the way, some had crossed the threshold. The female anxiously waited for a response. Kalik recalled a glimpse of a fire-orange proto-dragon in one of these earlier visions, and suspected this was the same one. In addition, he again found something familiar about her. No battle, Malagos agreed, much to her relief, and to Kalik's as well. Kalik realized that he was not surprised that Malagos could also speak, but only because the blue dragon had seen within the male, known his thoughts. This was not the Malagos he knew, but even this less sophisticated version was swift of thought. Malagos searched the heavens for another orange figures, and, finding none, took a more dominant spot among the female. She, in turn, did not show any unease at his decision, whether a sign of good judgment or naivete. Kalik did not yet know. I am alone, she added, looking for another, a male of my kind. Clutch brother. Clutch brother. Kalik knew that term. Dragons from the same clutch of eggs were considered the closest of siblings. Kalik had been one of 4, but was now the only survivor. He assumed that proto-dragons had larger clutches and thus more chances of survival for the young, but evidently familial bonds still existed, at least for some like this female. Malagos did not hesitate. No others of yours? The female looked disappointed. I have nowhere else to look. Kalik sensed Malagos's train of thought. She, not being one of Malagos's breed, the male had no interest in the female, but he enjoyed proving his cunning. Besides, since he was neither hungry nor tired at the moment, The activity suited him. There are other places. He hunts? She thought for a moment. He likes to find new places. This appealed to Malagos, who enjoyed such an activity himself. If he is not here, he must be south. There is a trail? I know where he was. I do not know where he went. Show me. But as the female wheeled around and Malagos started to follow, Calic's world leapt forward in such a jarring manner that at first he lost all sense. As his mind settled again, he saw that the pair now flew over a rocky but warmer landscape. This is where, Malagos finally asked, Clutch Brother was here? Yes. Once more, Calic was taken by the conversational ability of the proto-dragon, but before he could pursue the question, a third charcoal-gray proto-dragon flew into view from the west. The gray creature spotted the pair and immediately darted towards them. Malagos let out a low growl. Calic, who had been expecting another simple meeting, realized that the two proto-dragons were about to battle. No fighting, the female called. No enemies. A waste, snarled Malagos as he surged to meet the newcomer. He is a stupid one, not smart. The gray suddenly opened wide his maw. A thunderous sound escaped. Calic suffered along with Malagos as the shockwave struck like a hammer, sending his host spiraling backward. Without hesitation, the gray eagerly pursued. Unlike the first two proto-dragons, this one was as Malagos had indicated This one was as Malagos had indicated and akin to those with which Calic was familiar, an unthinking beast. Malagos managed to right himself just in time. He exhaled in turn, and a chilling frost enveloped the oncoming gray. The attacking proto-dragon spun, his wings and head frozen, then dropped below Malagos. Malagos dove after, which proved a mistake. The gray shook off the effects of his foe's blast and, still spinning, accidentally caught Malagos directly across the chest with his tail. Calic wanted to gasp along with his host as the air was shoved from Malagos's lungs. The icy blue proto-dragon fought to keep aloft as he nearly blacked out. Calic uselessly urged him on, but also felt consciousness slipping away. Then a burst of flame caught the gray in the face. The gray roared in pain, the fire having struck close to his eyes. He shook his head, blinded. Recovering, Malagos unleashed another cold blast just as a second plume of fire also struck. Under the double onslaught, the gray retreated. He continued to roar, both in agony and frustration, as he fled the pair. Malagos gazed up at the female, allowing Calic to do the same. She looked both relieved and confused. He was scared. I did not want to fight. He gave no choice. Scared? Malagos snorted, and Calic puzzled over her explanation. He shared his host's low opinion of their attacker. Very stupid beast. Not smart like me. Not smart like Malagos. You are smart, Malagos, she agreed. Smarter than me. And though Malagos accepted her words as fact, Calic suspected that the fire-orange proto-dragon was smarter than she had thus far revealed. I am smart, repeated Malagos, taking pride in the compliment. I will find your clutch brother, Alexstrasza. Alexstrasza? Calic observed the young female through his host's eyes, finally recognizing the traits in that smoother, slimmer face. Yes, this was Alexstrasza, but a much younger one he would never have believed could be the Lifebinder. The pair had apparently told each other their names sometime in that lost period between the two parts of their maddening vision. Curiously, Alexstrasza only nodded disinterestedly. She continued to eye in the direction to which their brief adversary had fled. So scared. He attacked us because he was scared. Why was he scared? Not having noticed that himself, Malagos simply shrugged. Again, Kalek shared his predecessor's disinterest. He only wanted to escape this madness. He wondered what was happening to his body. Another attack of vertigo overwhelmed him. Kalek floated in darkness for a moment, once again returned not to the Nexus, but rather to some other vision seen through young Malagos. They were in what, to Kalek's judgment, was some other part of the same jagged landscape. The sky was as overcast as that over Northrend. A mournful howl rose from Malagos's side. Malagos seemed to know what it entailed, for despite Kalek's desire, his host did not immediately turn toward the cry. Only when the howl continued unabated did he finally look. And there Kalek at last beheld Alexstrasza. Her snout pointed to the sky, her cry one of terrible loss. Had he a body of his own, Kalek knew that he would have felt a chill run up and down his spine, so terrible the sound. Alexstrasza's wings draped the ground like a shroud. Her body rocked back and forth, and her tail scraped the rocky soil over and over. As Malagos had promised, he had found her clutch brother, what remained of him. Kalek now wished that his host would turn away, but Malagos eyed the corpse with growing interest as he tried to make sense of the death. Alexstrasza's sibling had perished violently, not a surprise in this world, but he had not simply been slain in some duel with another proto-dragon. No breath weapon with which Kalek was familiar, or that even Malagos recognized, would have left the corpse in such a horribly desiccated state. The fire-orange male was nothing more than a shriveled mass of skin and bone. And what was worse, the contorted visage gave every indication that Alexstrasza's brother had suffered throughout the entire monstrous process. Alexstrasza continued to mourn. Malagos, however, suddenly shivered. A sense of unease filled Kalek's host, though it was clear to Kalek that Malagos did not understand why the feeling now overwhelmed him. A vast shadow blanketed the area. It vanished as swiftly as it had appeared. Malagos rose into the air, spinning so that he could quickly see in every direction, but all that was visible was the thick cloud cover. No, there was something high above, just discernible for Kalek for a moment. He tried to urge Malagos to look in that direction. His host finally did. At the same moment, whatever lurked above briefly darted through the bottom of the cloud cover. But before Kalek could focus, his surroundings became a chaotic maelstrom of unintelligible voices, roars, and momentary images so brief that he could make sense of none of them. And then the blackness engulfed him once more. All right. We're going to cut it there. Or it's just getting late for me. And I'm about to fix that. I gotta work in the morning. So I hope you enjoyed today's stream. Sorry for my stuttering over words and such. I seem to be tired, but then I'm also emotionally tired right now. So there's a bunch of things happening, and it's bothering me more than I wanted to. Anyway, here we go with the spiel. If you enjoyed this stream, please consider a follow and hitting the notification button so you know when I'm going to be on. I am normally on Thursday through Sunday, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard, 6 p.m. Pacific. Most of the days I've been video gaming, and that's going to be Warcraft, but we started to test out doing this story time Sundays just to see if people are interested. A normal steady is clockwork, but in case Twitch doesn't notify you that I'm on, or if I should be late, like I was today, or if I'm too sick to be on, or I'm going to be away, please join the Discord, link in the description, exclamation point, Discord also to get a link. There I am the most active, and I will tell you exactly when I'm going to be on and what we're going to be doing. There's also suggestions, nerd pages, just nerd, um, whatever you'd like. If you want to interact with me, that's the best place to go. We have Facebook, but I'm not as active on that. Best bet's Discord. We also have a YouTube page. Link below. Exclamation point YouTube. We got some VODs going up on there now. I'm still very behind at putting them up. But there's going to be other videos too, like my overthinking series, which is going to be covering books and TV shows and video games and all sorts of stuff that I've been overthinking on and putting up my theories with whenever I get the chance to. My life has been very hectic and busy, so I've had a hard time trying to keep up with everything. Still trying to make affiliate. More eyes on me when I'm live is helpful. So if you know of anyone who's interested in playing World of Warcraft, go someone to help them go through the story so that they understand what is happening and how everything is linked. Because I was once a noob and did not know what was going on when everything was happening. So the stories were very confusing and hard to understand, but the more I read, the more I learned, and the more I was able to piece it together, and now I'm like basically filling in storylines for Warcraft, I wish professionally, and also making up predictions of how stories are going to go, and I'm still getting it right. So if you want to go to somebody who actually has predictions and is correct, I'm the one to go to. Okay, yeah, that's about it for tonight. Thanks again for joining us. We'll be back on Thursday night at 9 p.m. Pre-patch was still not going to be on, so we might continue on with Burning Crusade so that we've got we keep going on with the playing each X pack as best as we can, with them, cruising through it or burying it under. Let's hurry up and level so that you can get to endgame stuff. Okay, thank you again. Hope you have a good week. And we will see you Thursday night. Take care.